Sign language is a language, just like spoken language. So that is why sometimes we use the word signed language as opposed to sign language, to differentiate between signed and spoken. So it is a natural language. It is a full-fledged language. The difference is that it is manual, it is visual, and it is used by a community of people who are unable to use the vocal communication because they are identified as deaf. They are not able to use their vocal, but they are able to use their hands and facial expressions to communicate. And just like the spoken languages, signed languages develop from the community of deaf people. Sometimes it can start with the home sign where a child is born deaf, maybe in the midst of other deaf children, or even in the midst of hearing siblings and parents. And before you know it, the child begins to develop the signing system out of the natural endowment for linguistic activities or for communication activities. The child is able to do this.
All right. So what major challenges do the deaf community face, especially kids now, in learning sign language?
So my work has been focusing on these major challenges like you rightly mentioned. If you bring it down to Nigeria and most African countries, where according to our studies, over 75% of children born deaf and those who became deaf, after birth, they are born in the midst of hearing people, and their deafness could have been prevented or avoided, but they saw themselves as deaf. Primarily, there is some level of rejection. It is some kind of a cycle amongst families and parents. Of course, you and I may know the cultural, the religious, the societal stigma that are attached, to when a person has some form of disability. Now, deafness is one of those conditions that parents, families hardly accept when it occurs in their children or in any of their children, of course. So there is that rejection mentality that kicks in amongst the people of the family. So the child is immediately ignorantly plunged into a situation whereby there is what we call language deprivation, lack of access to language and communication. And when this happens, that is the number one, that is the primary problem any deaf child will face.
How then can we, and when I say we, I mean society, be better in accepting and of course catering to other means of communication, especially sign language?
We every day and every year we talk about the United Nations Convention for Human Rights. And it is appalling that most of the times when we talk about all these human rights, right to communication, right to literacy and education, we hardly think about these rights, the grassroots, where it touches people with very limited communication because of limited language access. So one way at a global level, the world needs to pay more attention to the deaf community, especially the deaf community in our rural areas, whereby some of these things are happening and there is very limited information about, for instance, my research and or the researches of other people. So that is at a global level. Bringing it back to very local level, all of us need to identify the fact that there is a set of people, a community of people that are living amongst us whose means of communication is sign language.
And it's interesting that you mentioned sign language at the grassroots. And we've heard of indigenous sign language. First, I would like to ask, do we have indigenous sign language in Nigeria? And if we do have, how can we revive, our indigenous sign language and, of course, protect the heritage?
Language is a piece of culture, and culture is one of the areas that was so highly attacked, that was so highly beaten down by colonialism, whereby our languages were reduced to the point that we even hate to speak them. And today you and I are enjoying speaking English as if it is in our blood. And we think if English was not there, maybe we wouldn't have the communication, which of course, in my opinion, it is not true. If Nigeria were to be a country like it is today, and without English, there would have been a language that Nigerians would use that would have been an indigenous language. So, going back to, I mentioned earlier that every language develops from the community. As long as a community is formed, they have a language. So we had indigenous sign languages across deaf communities. The sign languages are named after the communities, or maybe the region, or even the nation. That is why you have what we call American Sign Language. It is a language of the deaf people used in America, which has different dialects. So in Nigeria, we have identified as far back as the 15th century. Of course, you should know that it should also go beyond that. Sign language systems used across Nigeria, some of which were named Abura Sign Language. There is the popular Hausa Sign Language. Today, we also talk about Yoruba Sign Language. But not as if these names are given because those are the names of the languages, but they are given to identify where the languages are being used. All of these are indigenous. They had been there before the introduction of the foreign or foreign-based version that came into Nigeria in 1960. So, and the argument anybody should be conversant with is, if there were deaf people in Nigeria as back as even before Nigeria became a country, did they have communication? And the answer is yes. And what variety of sign language did they use? The indigenous.
And of course, how can we revive these our indigenous languages?
Right now, we are in the process of doing that. My work with SDELI, Save the Deaf and Endangered Languages Initiative, we are committed to doing that. But it is not just an SDELI work. It goes beyond SDELI. It goes into the school systems, whereby they are claiming that American Sign Language is used to teach deaf children in the deaf school, which is something I find so insulting for the deaf community, for Nigerian system, for any people, any community at all, to boast that they are using another community's language to train and teach their children as if it is a gift. I mean, whenever I talk about this, I can't understand why and how we got to this point. If you have access to one of my articles, I set up a roadmap how the indigenous Nigerian Sign Language can be revitalized and recovered. Number one, awareness. There's supposed to be an awareness amongst the communities that we had indigenous sign languages in existence before the introduction of the foreign one. If there was that, they didn't completely die. Till today, some communities, some individuals in the rural areas still use some of these signing systems. They may have evolved, they may have developed, but so long as they are indigenous systems, they are available and they are still alive. We can get them back. And every language that is almost dying or that is facing endangerment, the only way to revitalize them is to start from documentation, which is what we are doing in SDELI. We are going into the communities, working with the deaf community to document the indigenous varieties that are signed that you cannot always see signed on the TV, signed in the schools and all that.
finally, we've come to the end of the documentation of the Indigenous Nigerian Sign Language right here in Kaduna. A whole lot of great stuff have been happening here in the last few days. We want to first of all thank the Almighty God for His mercies, for His goodness, and for His strength, for giving us the privilege to carry out this project successfully. We want to thank our HOP, our CEO, Dr. Emma Sonia, and also our head of research, Ms. Ane Fonakpan, and also all the team members that were down here on ground in Kaduna to ensure that everything went on well. We also want to thank you out there, our team member. I want to let you know that our victory here in Kaduna is also your own victory. Thank you so much to those who donated. Thank you for your support. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your encouragement. And we believe that with you, we can do better. We will do more. SDLE, 7 Day Indigenous Nigerian Sign Language.